All righty. This is Julie Yack here with 365.Training, and I am with my friend Chris. Chris, how's it going?
Awesome, awesome. Thanks, Julian. How are you?
I am well, thank you. I'm really missing people,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
personalities of being with different people and that part of our world.
yeah. You and me both. Luckily, in the UK, we've got an in-person event coming up in, gosh, when is it? Middle October. So we've got South Coast Summit, which I'm pretty psyched about. So like we're actually going to see people, which is cool, pretty cool.
All right, let's get to the prompting of the call was your decision tree that you've made.
Oh yeah.
So what prompted you to make this decision tree?
I think there were a few things, say. So ultimately, what happened was I get asked a lot of licensing questions all day, every day, and it happened at Microsoft. Basically, all I did was respond to licensing questions at Microsoft. And like I know it's not as simple as putting down one decision tree and giving people access to everything. It never works that way. There's so many things that can happen when building stuff. But then nobody understood the licensing guide. They couldn't figure out when to build what app. They couldn't figure out, what type of solutions needed to be built and why. And like ultimately, I kind of got bored of answering the same questions over and over again. So I said, well, what if I made something that was kind of very generic that just helped people understand some of it at least? I mean, like I said, there are little quirks in this licensing tree for a reason, and we're probably going to end up chatting about them. But yeah, it was meant to just give people a better idea of what they could potentially do. And this is one of about 5 different variants, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's why I did it. And I was just like, screw it, I'm going to put it on the internet. Like, why not? You know?
right.
And some people asked some questions. Obviously, I was like, well, you can't answer everything in one flowchart, especially with licensing. It's literally impossible. But what I can do is I can create a base, push for the sort of intelligent questions. And once people ask that, then we can kind of go further a little more. And actually, it worked. It's worked internally, it's worked with customers, and it's worked for some other folks. So yeah, I kind of thought, well, the other thing I want to do is I want to take this and I'm looking at turning it into a licensing bot, like a PVA sort of thing.
Nice.
Yeah, I've got a whole bunch of stuff going on in the background with this type of stuff, but like I want to be able to turn it into a conversational thing. So when you say, hey, what type of app what are you looking at doing? What type of problem are you looking at solving? Well, I'm looking at solving problem X. Okay, cool. Tell me some things about the problem. Well, these are the things that I have. Okay, this is the type of thing you should be doing. So like the maker assessment solution sort of thing inside the COE toolkit.
Yeah.
And that's aimed at more business users. This is not aimed at business users, right? So a business user is never going to go on here and be like, hey, let's use Dataverse for Teams. They won't have a cooking clue.
No, and we don't want them to, right? We want them to say, I have this great idea and I have this platform. So now I'm going to take this platform and this idea and make something that will help me be more efficient.
Yeah. And every single time I have a chat to a business user, right? Like you have to use different lingo, you have to use different terminology. You don't say, I mean, with business users, I never talk about apps ever. I don't ever think I mention the word apps in front of a business user because it's a solution, whether it's an app or a flow or a PVA or dynamics or
Right.
whatever have you. It can't just be one thing. And an app is one digital building brick in the platform, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but for techies, when you look at a techie goes, or an IT person or a developer goes, hey, an app like a Canvas app or a model-driven app, and they have the context, but often they don't know when and where, right? So the question I get asked the most is, when do I use Canvas versus model-driven?
Mm-hmm.
And that's an impossible question to answer because that's saying, well, you have to elaborate on the use case first. You've got to give me more detail, right? Once you've got
Right.
more detail, then you can start going down the decision tree and saying, hey, data, blah, 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 blah. And then you can route yourself across to a place that you can really make a decision on, right?
Right. Do you already have a solid data source? Right. Do you
Yeah,
need to bring in several data sources into a single platform? Those kinds of
exactly.
questions. Absolutely. Well, and now that we have Canvas pages kind of merging that,
Yeah,
blurring that area.
yeah, that is in a version of this. The pages is in a version of this. I
Right.
wasn't supposed to put it in the beginning because I think it was NDA'd at the time. So I put it in. I showed it to somebody, and they're like, "Yeah, actually, you can't say pages just yet. Although it's been mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
you can't like actually document about it." I thought, okay, well, that's not a problem. But yeah, there is one that exists with pages.
Nice.
If I can
Uh,
find. I'll share it. Yeah.
So I know at MVP Summit, all these secret things happen, but it's been 10 years or more. So I think this one's okay to discuss. 10
Yeah.
years plus ago at MVP Summit, we were being introduced to a new set of features and forms, as we tend to get at MVP Summit.
Yeah.
And I said, why don't we have entity agnostic forms? That's what I want. I want a form that I can put anything on, because the users don't give a damn about my data model. They just want something that works. And so it took more than 10 years, but I think I've got my entity agnostic experience just about.
You finally have.
Yeah.
That's super funny.
Yeah.
But that's, if I'm honest, that's so typical of what Microsoft do with this stuff. It really is. I mean, I see them say, like, I'm going to look at UX and UI, right? Like, look at 1.2 in Dynamics, not Power Platform, like actual Dynamics.
Right.
The UX is basically, I mean, they've changed, they've gone full circle with everything. They had the little blocks at the bottom, then they have the blocks at the top, then they have the side menu, then they ditched it, now they're back to the side menu. And it's the same thing with the technology they're using in the product stack, right? Like, the only thing that's good for people like you and I and the rest of the M3, the D365 team, is that they've democratized most of that stuff into the platform. So for us, the learning curve is a lot, we don't have to worry too much. We can kind of just hop onto something like Dataverse and use it and build a model-driven app without thinking twice. And Canvas apps for us is like, well, an extension of the stack. Whereas when you take it from the other end, the M365 team, they are terrified to death of Dataverse.
Yes.
Chat to M365 people, I do it all the time, right? You talk about Dataverse and all of a sudden it's just, and then you open things like the security model and you show them model-driven apps, and then it's lost on them.
Right.
Right. And
but it's what we grew up on.
Yeah. And for us, it's awesome, right? For us, we're like, hey, a model-driven app, that totally makes sense in this scenario. And it doesn't for a lot of people. I mean, apps and infra people, when you talk about Canvas apps and apps and infra person, they're literally like, leave me alone, because you're taking their job. But like, actually, there's a use case for all of it. There's a use case inside M365, inside Biz Apps, inside apps and infra, and inside data and AI. In every single scenario, it's just, how do you give them a way to understand where and when? And that's what I'm trying to start doing with this stuff. Yeah.
Right. I think that there's a place for just about anybody who wants a career in Power Platform. There's a place for you. Let's talk about what you enjoy, what you're good at, what do you know, what do you want to know, and let's find that place for you in Power Platform. If you're a data science nerd, there's a place. If you like custom UI, there's a place. If you're a three-dimensional thinker like I am, I can think in relational databases.
Yeah.
Right? Just how I envision things in my head. There's a place for that.
And I love that, don't you? I mean, like when I was working at Microsoft, one of the things I found was there was always this like bash up between M365, Biz Apps, and Azure, Apps and Infra, Data and AI. There was always this like, no, we do things over here because we have to. And I remember talking to a company called CPS some time back, and they were starting to use Dataverse and building up model-driven apps, and they were eating the business of some of the Dynamics partners. And they were selling stuff at like, I don't know, 1/3 of the cost. And, and it was brilliant tech. Judy, the stuff that they were building was absolutely phenomenal. And when I started looking at it, I'm like, so why can't Biz Apps partners do this stuff without throwing Dynamics at everything?
Correct.
And actually what happens is, I said this internally recently, I said, every single time you talk about Power Platform, it's a Dynamics opportunity. It's an M365 opportunity. It's an apps and infra and data and AI opportunity. It forms the base. It's like for me, it forms the base of the funnel, like even data, Power Platform, and then all the other stuff. It's just a phenomenal story whenever you start talking to people about what they're doing. And everyone that I know is doing something in the platform. So for me, if I feel super lucky because I get to chat to all of these folks doing all these different things.
Right. And I'm amazed by the thought process and creativity of problem solving that we get to see.
Oh yeah, I mean, I bet in what you're doing now, because you have contact with like millions of people all the time. Don't you find that the way you perceive problems from a software perspective has changed from 5 years ago to now? When you were looking at like Dynamics, now it's
yes and no. because from the very beginning of my career in Dynamics, it's always been the XRM side of Dynamics.
Oh, yes, I remember. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
And so, I mean, years and years ago, we were using Dynamics to manage cattle and herds and the diseases that follow the cattle and the herds across the United States.
That's crazy, though.
And I mean, that was back before online was a thing. So this was an on-premise installation of CRM that we were using to manage cows.
And that's the thing that cracks me up, actually, is because we've been at this for a long time, maybe a lot longer than some other folks. But then think about this, right? So look at the share pointers. So the share pointers have also been at it for a while, and then the age-old discussion of where do you put data, which is actually where this stemmed from, is like, where do you put data? Why do you put data there?
Right.
And that's yeah. And you're right. It does depend. It's not always a Dataverse, or it's not always a SharePoint, and it's not always a SQL database.
Right.
Yeah.
What is your personal comfort level? What skills do you have? What licenses do you have? What kind of data do you have? It's a whole collection of ingredients for that decision.
Spot on. And that's exactly why I built this thing, right? So when I think about the process of building an app, and I'm not looking at this from a business point of view, because like I said, that is a total different decision and discussion. Some things are apps, some things are not apps, right? But this is going, hey, I know I'm going to build an app. I know the outcome is going to be an app. It's not a flow, it's an app. And ultimately, when you think about it, it's data. Data normally dictates the place or the type of solution that you're going to build in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Because if you're building everything on a SharePoint list and you're hoping to expose it externally to a bunch of people, you're probably doing the wrong thing, right? Especially in the platform. And that's where you look at things like portals, right? You go, hey, is Power Portals, or whatever they're renaming it to now, going to be the right place for people to access information? So it's about data storage and how people get to it. And that's how I always see it. And if you put data in the wrong place because you are cheap, or you want to go the quick way out, or because you want to, have a quick win without actually thinking about the future, those are the things that don't scale.
Right.
Yeah, seen it a million times, and I've caused a lot of crap on Twitter by saying stuff like, SharePoint isn't a relational database. And yes, I know underneath the hood it is, right? But it's not meant for highly relational data structures. It's not meant as I've seen somebody build a CRM system on SharePoint. Guess what happened? It broke. Why? It doesn't understand the concepts of deep referential integrity and how to do relational structures and look after records like that. It doesn't get that. And then you're going to put it on top of that and hope that app scales, and then you build all the formula and logic into the app layer rather than the data layer. What's going to happen?
Yeah, it's going to be very unstable.
It's going to break, right? And then what happens is people get angry, and then they shout at Microsoft and say, hey, your products are junk. And then they shout on social media. And actually, it's got nothing to do with the products at all. It's got to do with how you design stuff.
Right.
And it's like that in CRM. I mean, remember building out those manual many-to-many relationships right in the very beginning. And everything was that. All we did was manual many-to-manys because that was easy. And then they came out with that, with the many-to-many. And then we were like, oh. And then we still did it because it was the right thing to do, because we could describe data better. And actually what happened is that there's a lot of legacy stuff out there that's broken with an app on top of it that doesn't work super well. Same problem.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it's always a good idea to keep an eye on the roadmap when you're planning your solutions, right? Because if I know that Canvas pages are coming to GA in the next X number of weeks, then I can plan around that and bide my time with that customer to make sure that we're giving them the right solution that's going to have a better shelf life.
I totally agree, 100%. Now, my issue with that on my end is when I talk to functional consultants, right? So people that are in the know, and community people are easy because community people always watch the roadmap. Community people are constantly like hovering over the roadmap, and then, somebody will spot something and post it on Twitter. And I'm like, actually, I have no cooking clue that was even coming, right? But it's when you have people that aren't necessarily with their fingers on the pulse all the time. They don't necessarily want to watch the roadmap. They just want to get on and deliver a solution, right? They don't know. And that's the thing that worries me is I've got solution architects that I know that don't watch the roadmap. And those people are designing solutions. And I go like, oh, wow, okay, well, dude or dudette, do you know that pages are coming? Were you aware of that? No clue.
And that's why whenever I teach solution architects, we have that conversation, right?
Yeah.
And next week I'm teaching the beta teach for the new functional consultant course, so the PL 200.
Oh, cool.
The first teach of it since we've done the updates. And one of the things we're going to talk about is keeping your eye on the roadmap. And how do you find those things? Where do you look for those things?
Yeah, and funnily enough, so I'm delivering maker enablement to a customer next week and the week after. And part of that is solution architecture. And actually, licensing does matter. I think actually it was Gus who put out a podcast some time back talking about the top 10 things about solution architecture. Didn't agree with all of them necessarily, but I do think things like data licensing, roadmap, all that type of stuff. If you're going to be putting the puzzle pieces together, you sure as hell better be aware of what's coming down the line.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll be interested to see what you deliver in that course, actually, because that's something that I actually wouldn't mind going on.
Well, I will keep you updated. Hopefully it goes well and we don't have a ton of updates to make, but that's why we do a beta, right? So that we can learn from it, make some slight course corrections, and then ship it. Absolutely.
I love that. I think that it's a good way of getting people a bit more engaged. And I hope you guys also include the community bits in there as well. Like, asking the people on the user groups and the community forums about stuff, because that's the only way that I learn.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Well, Chris, I won't take more of your time. I really do appreciate this chat that we've had. We'll make sure that we'll post a link to your decision tree that you've made. If you have,
there'll be more. I'll make more. I just use
perfect
with the links and all sorts of cool things.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Chris. It was great chatting and catching up.
Oh, thank you, Julie. It's always such a pleasure. It's good to see you. And I hope you guys are all well as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Cool.